So I have the pleasure of being with my good friend Ryan Watts today for our first ever BioHive podcast, which is exciting. Ryan, you grew up in Utah. One of the things I loved about our very first meeting together was we were going on a walk. I don't know if you remember this, but we were on a walk in your neighborhood in Holiday, and this was before you moved to the ranch. And you and I were just kind of walking along the creek, I guess it is. And you said to me something about how you loved this state. And it was time for people to recognize that life science wasn't something that was going to happen as far as an industry in the state, but was something that had already happened. So you grew up here, left, came back. You built your manufacturing facility here. We're going to get into all of that on the podcast. But let's open with your thoughts today on what it means to be a Utahn and what it means to build in this awesome state.
Jared, well, great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks to be able to have thank you for spending time having a conversation. The interesting thing about biotech right now is it is global. It's everywhere. And I think often to identify with a place can be advantageous or disadvantageous. I mean, there's two ways to view it. Utah is unique because of its history of what I believe is pioneering, doing things that were kind of unexpected. If you think about Salt Lake City, for example, this is not a great place when everyone arrived to basically build a thriving city.
No.
And the environment itself is difficult. There's extreme winters, there's extreme summers, and our ancestors did something extraordinary. They built an incredible city and an incredible state. And I actually believe that spirit of pioneering, of doing things very difficult, actually there's probably a lot easier ways to do it, is at the heart of a lot of what we try to do in biotechnology. Finding a medicine is extraordinarily difficult.
Right.
And so I feel like at least the threads of accepting challenges is a foundation of Utah, and that's why I believe it's a place to do incredible things. Now, as we had, and I remember that walk now very well. Thanks for reminding me of that time.
It was a beautiful day.
Utah has been pioneering in many medical advances, not obviously medical devices for many years. And what we need to do is when we think about pharmaceuticals or medicines or diagnostics, just basically catch that wave of doing things that are very difficult. But I think it's ingrained in what's happened in Utah. The other thing that's happened with Utah is it's now international. It's not just a single homogenous group of people. It has pretty incredible diversity. And it's a place where, because of its kindness and its work ethic, which I think in many ways the BioHive is named after, this concept of everyone plays a particular role and wants to see everyone else succeed. That's really powerful. And it's not that way in other communities in biotech. And there's a great invention, great mindset, very competitive. But I think if Utah can take advantage of its unique, I'll call it Western culture, where people want to help each other and want to see success, and you can be kind but also competitive. You can be kind but also fiercely committed. You're going to see great things continue to happen in Utah. So it's not that it hasn't happened. It's just now we're going to do it in other areas in addition to medical devices.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, and I agree. I mean, especially on the device side, this has been a hub for many years. I don't know if you know this. So right now, where we're sitting in the BioHive podcast studio is legitimately where the Jarvik heart was manufactured. So, in fact, I have one of the original Jarvik hearts to come off the manufacturing line sitting in my office. It's the most rudimentary device you've ever seen,
Yeah.
But really incredible how that level of just ingenuity has existed here for a long time, a really entrepreneurial community.
That's right.
Okay, so walk me through the last 11 years of scaling. You went public during that period of time. Just kind of take me through those steps.
I don't remember life before Denali. That's how. That's all I eat, drink, and sleep, and maybe every once in a while, sell a pair of cowboy boots for
that
my
is
wife.
That is a true entrepreneur take on things.
And I mean, it's been every emotion you can imagine. I think it's incredibly rewarding, extraordinarily challenging, and I'm sure they correlate. when you want to do something really important and different, we wanted to invent really the first medicine to cross the blood-brain barrier. We knew there was going to be many challenges along the way. We've had a number of medicines fail. And the way that Denali was built, it was kind of unique. We didn't leave Genentech and, bring an academic idea and then raise money around that. It was a group of investors that said, now is the time to go after neurodegeneration. I argued that the blood-brain barrier had to be solved in order to do that. That was our thesis. Yeah. But these investors said, we think this is the team that's going to do it. And then we built the team, and then we planted like all of these seeds. And frankly, it was probably like planting seeds in the Salt Lake Valley, because neurodegeneration had a 99.7% failure rate, and we've had a number of medicines fail, and had a conversation with a woman today whose father-in-law was diagnosed with ALS, and I said, she said, do you have any ALS drugs that you're developing right now? I said, actually, we had 2 that failed. We put a lot of time and effort into it. And so you're planting all these seeds, but then you say, okay, I'm going to solve one part of this, which is let's solve the blood-brain barrier. And that's something we've been at now for 2 decades. And then you start to see, sprouts, and then you really tend to those sprouts. And so for us, it's in diseases that are more tractable, lysosomal storage diseases, where we've started to see traction. Our first medicine was approved 2 months ago, around our technology to cross the blood-brain barrier. But that's how it is in biotech. Maybe going back to the analogy of the Hive and the fact that we lift each other, we also need to understand that failure is part of it, but failure, you learn so much from that. And we've had a dozen medicines that we've stopped developing in the clinic.
A dozen?
Yes, a dozen.
What stage in the clinic?
Almost universally phase 1B.
Okay.
They're in efficacy studies. We have a few that failed in phase 1A for safety. And then we have a number now that are more advanced. They're in phase 3 studies and an approved medicine. But that's part of the challenge. And I think there's different styles or different there are different ways that companies are essentially founded and funded in biotech. And often it's a single asset that will live or die based on a phase 2 readout or a phase 1B readout or some efficacy, study. But our thesis at Denali is that we needed to be able to learn from those failures and engineer the next best molecule and evolve our strategy. And so the capital raising met that thesis, because and you see like the great biotech companies, which Denali strives to be at some point, basically had years of ups and downs and years of failure, but the institutional knowledge led to their ultimate success, especially platform companies like Alnylam or Regeneron. And for us, as a platform company that's solving the blood-brain barrier, we now have a decade of institutional knowledge of what does and doesn't work. And in biotech, where it's so challenging, that's, I think, it's a decent algorithm for success. It's not the only algorithm.
But it's kind of a critical element, because the companies, the one-off drug companies, when they fail, that institutional knowledge is often lost.
Yeah.
And so you don't have that to build on.
That's right.
That's a loss for patients.
That's right. I think it's a loss for patients. And, I think the other challenge is when you are a single asset company, what we saw, this is one of the things that Alex and I saw when we were at Genentech before founding Denali, is that there was an aversion to running the key experiment, because the life of the company depended on that experiment being successful. And so you'd be like, that's the experiment to run. And if it's negative, you're done. And so we felt like in founding Denali, we wanted to be able to run that experiment as quickly as possible and then be okay with it being done. And, that's not very, it's never fun to kill a program. It's less fun when you're a public company, but that discipline has been so important. And, 2 years ago, we actually made the decision to spin out all of our work on small molecules, because when Denali was first founded, we had both large molecules and small molecules, all about getting them into the brain. And that focus 2 years ago was absolutely critical for us to just focus on large molecules. I think it led to the first approved medicine for us treating Hunter syndrome. And now we have we've really focused in on getting medicines into the brain, large molecules, enzymes, antibodies, oligonucleotides.
Yeah. You work with students all the time, and you work with other young executives in the industry. You're a great mentor that way. Walk me through advice that you would give to them if they're starting their own.
Yeah, well, let me start with my passion for students and what I call and others call the defining decade, that age 20 to 30.
I like
when
that,
you're going,
defining decade. I've never heard this.
Yeah.
That's
and
great.
It's not my term. I'm borrowing it from others. But but the reality is, it's one thing to be passionate about what you're doing, but if that can then be shared with many others, they then embrace that passion. The probability of success and the benefit for humanity is big. And so, when I was a graduate student, I had a dream, and I still have that dream to be a professor. I want to teach students, and I want to research, and so industry seemed like a detour. But then when I joined industry, I realized that it was like the speed of industry, but still the learning of academia, and I absolutely love it. But decided to go back as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Utah and at Stanford and started teaching what I call the biology of biotechnology. The reality is it's the journey of a medicine from idea to delivering it to patients, to marketing. And I invited lecturers who had been part of that journey successfully. Either they manufactured medicines or they marketed medicines. It's always very interesting when you take a student who's getting a PhD, to listen to someone that talks about how do you get payers to pay for a medicine, or how do you manufacture it? And just to bring literacy to the whole drug development process so that when you're a scientist and you have an idea of a medicine you want to invent, you understand what the end goal is. And frankly, it was really educational for me. I mean, I worked in neurodegeneration, so it's not like we've had a lot of approved medicines. Now, having been through that journey, I look back at that education. I would invite people, and I would learn as part of this course, right? Yeah. And so, I think the one advice I would give to these students, to your question, is what would that if you're looking to go into industry, be really good at one thing, and then understand the rest of the process, and understand that you need to have best friends that can do all the other things that you can't do. And so for me, the one thing I wanted to be really good at was molecular neuroscience. I wanted to understand the actual workings of the nervous system at the molecular level to the best that we could understand as humans. And then that kind of shifted to really understanding the blood-brain barrier and doing a lot of basic research. I had postdocs in my lab. We did a lot of understanding trafficking. We invented some of the first technologies to get medicines in the brain at therapeutic concentrations. The idea was proposed, 20 years before us, but then we really figured out how to engineer them. And the goal was to get really good at that, and then surround myself with people who were amazing at all the other things. A physician who could design the right trial, someone who had experience in finance to help our financing strategy. And then when you work with those incredible people, you learn it instantly. I mean, they're there to guide, and you trust them, but you also learn that process. And so it's the combination of obsessed with one thing and then understanding that your network is what will ultimately lead to your success.
When you have a tough health insurance question, the last thing you need is a 40-minute hold and someone who's never heard of Utah. University of Utah Health Plan's health insurance is different. We're your neighbor. We know the local doctors and over 20,000 providers statewide, from Logan to St. George. And when you need world-class care, University of Utah Health is right here. Local health insurance expertise, real people, real help. University of Utah Health Plans. Find your health insurance plan at uofuhealthplan.utah.edu.
Interesting. So how many students have run through your courses between Stanford and the University of Utah at this point?
So I would do quick math. Like 15 students, per course. Maybe it's 20 at Stanford, 5-10 years, combined. Probably about 150, 200. They're small. We wanted to have the course so that you could work in groups of 3, and you had a course project at the end. The project was, and I asked this question of every new Denali employee, we go on a walk, every single employee, I said, all right, so if tomorrow you're the CEO of Denali, what do you focus on? What would you be concerned about? Including like everyone, doesn't matter what role. And it's fascinating when people have, obviously they come to the job in their own perspective. Maybe they came just out of their PhD, or maybe they play a particular role in our manufacturing facility. And what I loved about the courses, similar to that, is that there is no, learned bias. They just come to it with a fresh perspective of this is how I'm going to make drug development better, or this is how I'm going to make Denali better. That's the end question for each student was solve a problem that you think is slowing down drug development in a team of 3. And so they would do it. I mean, and that was it. It was listen to these lectures, understand the whole process. So, probably 150, 200 students, and many of which I stay, connected with and see them in their careers. Some are in venture capital, some are in industry. I don't have a lot who stayed in academia, to be fair, but I'm not preaching against staying in academia. I think it's, academics is really important.
But also even the structure of your class. I mean, it sounds like you're attracting people who want to go out of academia.
It's an elective course, so the only reason you would take it is to at least understand industry.
You want to go and do
exactly.
it.
I think so.
So you said to me once something to the effect of, and I'm going to butcher this, everybody wants to mean something. Everyone wants to matter.
Yeah.
Walk me through your thoughts around that. I believe it's a core belief of yours.
It's true, although maybe it's evolving over time. But I think that's, again, in addition to belonging and to feeling comfort, although some humans are better at being uncomfortable, and I might fall in that category because I'm on an airplane all the time. I'm used to being uncomfortable, and I'm okay with that. But being significant. Right.
That's right. That's what you said.
And I think this is probably a more recent conversation, something that my wife kind of brought to my attention. And I think, the thing that's incredible about biotechnology is that what you do can be incredibly significant. And I think every industry is a bit different. And because I've been in, the medical sciences and in biotech my entire professional life, I don't know anything else. But I can tell you that it's easy to be motivated. And it's actually relatively easy to get over failures because you know what you're trying to do. And the question is like how to become significant. Now, the challenge is I picked neurodegeneration as a space that I want to solve problems. And that is historically incredibly difficult. And luckily we've, with the right sort of mindset, gone after some monogenic rare diseases where we can make progress. But there's a human desire to be significant. And it could be in personal relationships, but of course we're talking about this from a professional perspective. Yeah. And I think if you're in the right team and you're working on the right, in the right company or in the right academic institution, your work can bring that, solve that innate desire to be significant. And I think it's obvious how that works in biotech.
So you did something recently. You mentioned it a couple months ago. You got your first approval. Denali got their first approval for Hunter syndrome. And that's significant, especially for the patients. Walk me through what that moment is like after all those years, especially for any of our listeners who are starting a biotech or want to start a biotech. It's a long journey from PowerPoint to product. It's a really long, as you've discussed today, difficult journey filled with ups and downs.
Right.
But this moment, approval in hand, what's that like?
20 years is to be exact on the journey here. What's actually really interesting because in 2006, we started working on blood-brain barrier technologies. This is in 2015, we founded Denali.
Okay.
And in 2006, the first and only previous approved medicine was approved medicine for Hunter syndrome, which is the enzyme itself. Okay, now the challenge with that enzyme is it can treat the whole body, but it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. We haven't gone into much detail about the blood-brain barrier, but the simplest way to think about it is the brain is an organ that's protected from the rest of the body. If you need sugar, if you need iron, if you need essential amino acids, they're all actively transported across this 400 miles worth of blood vessels in your brain. So they're like grab molecular machines, bring them into the brain.
Interesting.
So that it can create a very protected environment. Gets rid of viruses, generally gets rid of bacteria, really protects the brain so it can function. Also has this microenvironment where you have electrochemical signals, right? So the medicines that have been approved in lysosomal storage disease are now over a dozen. None of those medicines, when infused, systemically get into the brain. So it will treat all parts of the body, but many of these diseases, 70% of patients, their brain will start to degenerate. It actually starts as early as like 3 or 4 or 5 years of age. So the boys will develop normally till 2, 3, or 4, and then they'll start to fall off. And the boys, in the case of Hunter syndrome, it's X-linked. In Sanfilippo, it's both young boys and young girls. And if you have severe mutations, the average lifespan is about 15 years. So even with an approved medicine 20 years ago, the nervous system will degenerate, and eventually these patients will die. By about age 5, 6, or 7, they'll lose the ability to talk, and many of them lose the ability to walk, right?
That's awful.
So that's 20 years ago that enzyme was approved, and it is a huge advance. To get enzymes approved for enzyme replacement therapies, we had to clone the enzyme. We had to figure out what it is, the mutations are. Now there's some newborn screening in many states that will, basically diagnose these patients. But if you have a severe mutation, there will be neurologic manifestations and neurologic deficits. So now, that same year in 2006, we started working on blood-brain barrier. We started to try to understand how do we get medicines in the brain. We actually were focused initially on Alzheimer's and are still very focused on Alzheimer's disease. But it's a stepping stone. And the key is, if you go after a disease where you know the cause, it's not a biological question, it's a technical question. So we know this enzyme, if it got to the right place, would really benefit these patients. And now we can engineer a technology that we could prove it by getting these enzymes into the brain, but then now we can get antibodies and we get genetic medicines like oligonucleotides. But that was the key, is to prove it first. And actually, a place like Denali was the place to do that, because these are also ultra-rare diseases. And very large companies very rarely work on ultra-rare diseases. So for us, it's super meaningful. I mean, it's meaningful very personally, but also meaningful for a company to be able to succeed in that type of area. So I'm giving you the history here before I tell you what that day was like. But that was a great day. It was a good day. A lot of work, I think 20 years. It's kind of what you dream of when you're a scientist. I think, now it's like you have that moment where you're like, wow, this drug is approved, and now you just hope that every patient that gets diagnosed can have that drug, and that they can maintain their neurologic function. And for those that have lost neurologic function, that they can stabilize and have good and meaningful lives. And the thing that's unique about this disease is that these are small communities, and we get to know them very personally. I think I had mentioned to others the first call was to a mother who had asked me, several months earlier if her son could get the drug, and it was like, it was a pretty great moment. Yeah, it's pretty important. How you bind to these natural receptors. We actually hitch a ride with an iron transporter is very important. It's not as simple as just making a binder and hoping it works. Like, you have to engineer it very specifically at the right affinity, and that's the fun science part. But that science ended up translating to like real differences in how much medicine gets in the brain. We saw, 9 out of 10 of the boys had completely normalized substrate levels, and the 10th that didn't was like 85% or 80% normalized. So it was only like 5% off. And then we saw they all normalized on a biomarker for neurodegeneration called neurofilament. So great moments in time. The first clinical data showing that heparan sulfate can normalize, that's the substrate. And then it took us a couple of years, but then we halted neurodegeneration. Remember, the goal of Denali was cross the blood-brain barrier and defeat degeneration. And in this disease, we have that ability to do that. I remember these moments very vividly where you're at. One was driving in a car, received a phone call, just had left my parents' home after filming my mother who had Alzheimer's. The other time I was on an airplane, ready to take off, got a phone call and said neurofilament is normalized. And then, the approval, we were all together. We were at Denali, which is better than being on an airplane or in the car by yourself.
Sure.
But those are all very important moments. Right?
So over the course of this 20-year story, then, for this drug, you've got the founding members of the company, you have your investors, you have all of these people who really are working together to try and defeat these diseases, cross the blood-brain barrier, develop a platform that they can build a number of drugs on. Tell me about the heroics. Any stories in there that stick out to you where someone went above and beyond? I'm guessing there's many.
Many, and I think, I'll start with probably the most important, which are these families who live with these diseases. And what's unique about the ultra rare and the rare disease communities is, again, how tight-knit and how connected. And their advocacy, and they have to advocate not just bidirectionally and multi-directionally. They have to advocate to regulators, that are making decisions around the medicines. They advocate to companies who will start working in a disease area and then say, you know what, this is not a big enough disease for us to work in. I mean, there's a lot. They have to advocate with their healthcare providers, with insurers.
So they're fighting on all sides.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about finishing. It's like in life, it's really easy to start things. It's challenging to stay committed, but it's rare to finish. And I feel like the last 3 months of our journey to get this drug approved, there were extraordinary people within Denali who just worked night and day, and worked with our regulators as we were negotiating, the indication statement in the label, who worked on the manufacturing, which these are not trivial medicines to make. They're, human proteins. And there are, like a dozen, 2 dozen, the team had, almost 70 people for a disease that has 500 patients total in the entire United States. And that last mile, the last 5% makes all the difference. And especially in this day and age, and how often it easy or how common it is to not get approval kind of right at the very end. I feel like those are the other heroics. And I get the benefit of, I get to see all those challenges and engage in problem solving with those individuals. But I go back to my original thesis, which is get really good at one thing and then surround yourself with amazing people. It's easy to say. I actually kind of believe that most people are amazing if they're motivated appropriately and if they're also really good at one thing. And that team is the only solution, right? Something as complex as inventing a medicine cannot be done in isolation. There's no single individual that can do that.
Yeah. So what's next?
That's a great question. I mean, for Denali, my obsession is now to apply this technology to all these other diseases. We've just started, in fact, we just announced last week, patients enrolled in our Alzheimer's program, where we're knocking down the gene that produces tau, which is a protein that aggregates in Alzheimer's. We also have one for A-beta. I'm very personally, motivated by going after Alzheimer's disease. And so I think what's next is, we know the platform works, let's apply it. And it's as exciting, application as exciting as inventing. Doesn't seem like it, but it is, because now you're going to go in, that you have a technology that works, and now we're going to go test the targets. Are these the right targets? Are we designing the right trial? Are we getting to the answer as quickly as possible? I think the other thing is, I'm really excited about the ultra rare space in lysosomal storage disease, because there are success. We have success, and there are 70 diseases that are enzyme loss of function. And in totality, 70% of those patients have some neurologic manifestation or more. I mean, many of them even over time, like as they become adults. And so what's next is bringing a lot of those enzymes forward, creating a franchise, if you want to call it that, where we use the transport vehicle technology that is a very exciting endeavor because it has high probability, but very, very high impact.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple times today of how important Alzheimer's is for you. What makes that one so personal?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the year before founding Denali, my mother started to develop dementia, and I had been working in the Alzheimer's space for about a decade. So my own lab had focused on blood-brain barrier and Alzheimer's. And when I say on Alzheimer's, it wasn't just about getting medicines in the brain, it was also understanding the genetic cause of Alzheimer's. So it had a broader focus to it. And we did this experiment where we sequenced individuals that were greater than 80 years of age but had a genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's. So they would have a very high likelihood of getting Alzheimer's, but they were cognitively normal. Yeah. And we were looking for genes that protect people from Alzheimer's disease. And we discovered this gene that actually ends up being the gene that is most linked to Alzheimer's. It's amyloid precursor protein, but it was a protective mutation. And I think at that point, it was sort of the genetic bookend proving that Alzheimer's, at least genetically, can be caused by amyloid beta through the various genetics, right? And then I just was living this personal journey, with my mother who, has Alzheimer's. We have genetic risk in our family, including children as well as parents and grandparents.
Did you know the genetic risk prior to your mom?
We did. We didn't know that genetic risk. I mean, I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of everyone should know their genetics, but if you know it, you want to be able to do something about it. And I'm in a unique position
to do that,
working with people who can and go after these type of things. And I think ultimately, Alzheimer's is going to be treated through a prevention paradigm where you look at your genetic risk, you look at your accumulating proteins in the brain, and then you're going to proactively remove those aggregated proteins prior to any cognitive decline. And so the goal now, when you say what's next, is to make medicines that are safe enough, that cross the blood-brain barrier, that at relatively low doses and with ease, like a sub-Q dose, we can remove those aggregated proteins and really extend, the onset, if ever, of the dementia associated with neuronal loss that's caused by these aggregated proteins.
Wow. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for tuning into HiveCast by BioHive. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone who would find it valuable. You can find more episodes and updates at biohive.com or by following BioHive Utah on LinkedIn and Instagram. Thanks for being part of the Hive. We'll see you next time.